Well, good evening all. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, but while we're waiting, I'd just like to welcome you all along and say thank you for coming. I'd like to thank our speakers, who you can see on the screen at the moment, and I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors for making this all possible for YRP to run. Just a couple of quick notices for you. This event is being recorded and will be shared by YRP. We are looking for this to be interactive, so there is an option for you to pose questions as you go along. We will be monitoring that and trying to make sure that as many questions are answered either as we go or at the end as possible. So tonight we have got Dr. Emma Taylor giving us a talk on cybersecurity in context. Emma is an award-winning chartered engineer with more than 30 years of experience across a variety of sectors. She's the head of digital safety at RazorSecure, a rail cybersecurity solutions company. She's previously been at RSSB and led their response to the Cambrian ERTMS incident, facilitating industry engagement and understanding of complex software-based systems in response to rail and accident investigation recommendations. Emma's been listed as one of the Cranfield School of Management Women to Watch in 2020. We also have Dr. Richard Thomas. Dr. Richard Thomas is an industrial fellow at the University of Birmingham, with his research focusing on railway supply chain cybersecurity, and he's a member of a research institute for trustworthy interconnected cyber-physical systems. He carried out research into the cybersecurity of ERTMS train-to-wayside communications, proposing solutions to meet the future needs of railway signalling. He's been credited with the discovery of 5 critical vulnerabilities in industrial control systems. Finally, we have Claire Davis, MBE, who is Director of Group Information Security at Arriva PLC UK. Claire has over 30 years of experience in the field of intelligence and security, starting out in the UK military, where she enjoyed a globe-trotting career identifying, assessing, exploiting, and ultimately defeated the threat to security proposed by those engaged in terrorism, espionage, sabotage, and subversion. More recently, she's led a team of information security and data professionals within Arriva. She's particularly passionate about creating momentum around awareness to cyber threats within the rail industry and mentoring new recruits in the field. So one day she can retire. On that note, I would like to hand you over to Emma Taylor, who will start her presentation for you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, David, for the introduction. Okay, I'm waiting for the screen share. Let me know when it's due to come up. I think you might need to reshare the screen, David. I can start talking anyway whilst I'm waiting for the little box to flick up. So it's really great to have the opportunity to come and talk to the YRP community about cybersecurity. And I am just part of like the 3 panelists that are going to run through and talk today. And as I was drafting this talk, the most important thing was to put it around the topic of cybersecurity in context. And here we go, brilliant, one presentation coming up. Now, what do I mean by that? I think if you sit and talk about cybersecurity, it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. Some people think about what happens in the media, other people think about technical disciplines. And one of the key things that you have to do with cybersecurity is you have to have everybody pulling together, everybody playing their part, irrespective of technical discipline or context or company. And so what I wanted to do with this talk is build a bridge between the different discipline areas, technical, regulatory and commercial, and any other sort of topic and discipline and company that you might think, so that we can all start engaging and talking together. So I'd like from the start, the get-go, please feel free to put your questions in the chat window. Let me know a bit about the background that you're working in. David and the other YRP team people will be running through and consolidating so we can have a good and dynamic panel discussion. So first up, who are we? Now, often when we're doing presentations like this and the company puts up their company slide, everyone thinks, oh God, they're going to go through their company sales brief. And that's not why this slide is up here. I think the reason why cybersecurity is such a challenging field is that what you really need to have is frontline experience in dealing with it, like Claire and Richard do, in order to be able to understand where we are now at the ground truth and how like the railway network is vulnerable and how it can be improved. And so that's why this slide is up. It's simply to say that we've protected more than 50 million passenger journeys. We're on quite a lot of vehicles. And here are some of our customers, and we have others that we're less public about. So everything that's coming in this talk is frontline experience. I can't cover the whole of cybersecurity, technical, regulatory, commercial across the globe in the remaining 20-25 minutes, but I can tell you about what we know about what we've seen directly. So this is the overview in 4 parts for like the rest of the hour. A very brief cybersecurity primer with those caveats. You can't fit it all in a short period of time. A technical context, and then the bridge across to commercial and regulatory aspects, the landscape, the broader landscape, and 3 or 4 slides to wrap up, and then straight to the panel discussion. And as I said, as we're running through, please feel free to put your questions, your challenges, the things that you want to know about, run it through on the chat window. Cybersecurity is very much a team sport. So a primer. When we're sat here at the point of view of RazorSecure, these are the things that we hear people hinting at or saying at. Obviously, first is the safety of the railway systems, and you need security to be in place in order to have a safe railway running system. Every organization is aware of cybersecurity. You can't but look at the media to realize that there are issues there. So second need that we hear is very much, how can you help manage our cyber risks? How can you help us monitor where we're at, whether you're an operator, an asset owner, or even somebody in the supply chain? And cyber risks is a very broad topic. It includes not only the railway systems, but also a company's IT systems. And the third one, provide 100% availability of the railway. Now, you might think 100% isn't achievable, and like we're not in a perfect world, but the reality is that in order to be able to assure availability of the railway network to the point that you need it in order to like meet customer expectations, you have to protect both the physical and the digital infrastructure, which means you need to look at cyber risks and you need to measure and manage and monitor them so you can be sure that you're not going to get taken down and be unable to operate. So I'm going to start off with just a couple of sort of practical displays, and apologies to everyone who's seen this beforehand. This is an example of someone that chose to, they had access, they were allowed to, but chose to reprogram the PIS. So that's a display that you see in many trains, if not all of them, when you're going about on your journeys, to just like a little compliment to somebody who likes trains, who's called G. Now you might think, and there's a Twitter shot from the right-hand side, you might think, oh, isn't that great? Isn't that funny? You know, like that makes me smile. Except for the fact that what happens if someone had chose to induce passenger panic by putting that command up? And that's just one person who has got access and chose to put that message up. There are many other ways in which people could put and control messages up on the PIS display, which could then be used to impact the safe operation of the railway. So it raises a smile, but it also indicates a vulnerability. Another example, Stadler, and this is again public domain here, they were hit by a cyber attack on their IT systems last year. And you might think to yourself, what impact does that have with running the railway? But when trains, when rolling stock are digitally connected, and they also have a lot of onboard data that's taken off board for processing, whether it's maintenance, operations efficiency, passenger load, if you take down one part of the IT network, you know, the corporate IT network, you also then have I guess I could call it a contagion effect, a knock-on effect on the other parts of the system because everything is connected. So you can see that like there are 2 clear examples here when you consider the interconnectedness of like the digital network and how that can impact both the safety and the efficiency of the running of the railway network. So let's step back. You know, what is like the train network? How digital is it really? And there is a new cybersecurity technical specification called TS 50701 that got released on the 12th of July. And if you're interested to understand how cybersecurity can impact the railway network, I suggest you get hold of a copy of it, find a presentation, talk to your standards leads in your organizations, because it sets out in one document just what the digital perspective on a railway network should be. And this is just an extract from one of the pictures. Probably the key message here is that, like all the digital systems, from signaling, which of course everyone's going to call safety critical, through to public services, such as you're sat on your train and you've got Wi-Fi and video on demand, they're all connected in one way or another. And actually, it's not just the signaling and the traction and the braking and the control and command systems which are vulnerable to digital disruption, it's the others too as well. And as I showed, even if it's PIS or HVAC, you can also still impact the safety and the efficiency of the running of the railway. Imagine if someone got hold of like the air conditioning system and turned it up very hot or very cold. You could certainly disrupt passenger behavior. So there are digital vulnerabilities, but also that data provides opportunities because you can use it to improve and optimize the running of the railway. Taking a step back, and rest assured, I'm not going to go through this diagram in whole detail. This is the overall view of the railway network taken from a digital perspective. And you can see the color codes here. Red is signaling, orange is command and control, green is auxiliary, light green is comfort, so that was the PIS and HVAC, and the lilac color is that video on demand, public services aspect. And the key message is it's all connected. You have got an overall network that connects the operational control and maintenance, the station, the train on the journey itself, and the track system. And when you look at a train from the perspective of physical parts, you don't necessarily see all this interconnectedness, because in practice it isn't to the same degree that is digitally. But where information flows, physically or via Wi-Fi or via sort of radio communication networks, the network is itself connected. So if you take one thing from this presentation and one thing from this discussion, take away this sense of interconnectedness and information. So jumping from like mental knowledge to like meeting the CIA. Now, I don't mean the CIA from like American movies and things like that. I meet the CIA, which is like a little acronym that talks about the 3 aspects of data that you need to consider when you're considering the cybersecurity of the railway. This too is part of the primer. All 3 of them may lead to safety impacts, and all 3 of them are relevant. Confidentiality. Has the data been used in the system? Has it been compromised? Integrity. Does the system operate as expected? Are the system outputs to be trusted? When you get that data from that maintenance system, from that train being broadcast to the IT sec, is it the right information? Can you trust it? And is the information available when you need it to be? When the Stadler issue happened, I understand they had to disconnect their trains, and that means that maintenance data is no longer available. So a second takeaway for you, however you think of the level of cybersecurity you're going to get involved in, take away those 3 letters, because those 3 letters can help you think about that flow of the data and what happens if the confidentiality is disrupted, the integrity is changed, or the data is not available. There we are, a short cybersecurity primer. Now to the technical context. Now, as both Richard and Claire know, and anybody that works in cybersecurity, the day-to-day job, I could easily fill up 3 hours with technical detail. So bear with me as I do it in 10 to 15 minutes and base it on what we see and how we operate. And I'm going to bring it all back to case studies and examples. So you've got this highly complex network of the whole train system, and you've got this highly complex network on a train. What's the first thing that you need to think about? And another 3-letter acronym, DMZ, which is a very kind of exotically named demilitarized zone, but all it means is separate parts of your network. So if you have parts of your network that are involved with operations and parts of your network that are involved with safety, separate them. If it's not connected directly without any barriers, such as a security gateway, then you've got a way of collecting and monitoring and managing those data flows. You've got an opportunity to intervene and see if you see something working not as it should be. So very simple there, separate it out. And obviously, when you've got this kind of gateway, you might want to attach to it mobile communication gateway. Next slide is a little acronym heavy. I do apologize, but it wouldn't be the railway if it didn't have acronyms. But that's it. So you need to think about communication and you need to think about separation. Very simple thing. Does it need to be on that network? Does it need to have access to that information? If not, consider separating it, and if not, consider passing the information via a different route. If the information is not passing through, then it can't get disrupted through cybersecurity, and you won't get one of those CIA related incidents. So there we are, poof, there we are. Trains are not simple, trains are engineering, and here is a standard non-representative network design from EN 61375. And if you're new to the railway runs on standards. So, and these are good because they help set out the common baseline. So there's just 3 or 4 things to point out here. Remember I talked about that passenger facing part of it? You have the passenger network on the top line. MCG is that communications gateway. We all know Wi-Fi, and we all have passenger access points. Next one is operational Ethernet network, and Ethernet is also something you might be familiar with in your office configuration. We all know what CCTV and DAS, driver advisory system, are. There's that passenger information system, HVAC. DCU, data control. And just below, highlighted in that orange, is that gateway, that sort of barrier that you can put in place. Below is TCMS, that's train control. MVB is a type of engineering network. And right down the bottom, trackside signaling. Now, hang on a moment, you're thinking that's not connected by a cable, trackside to train. But of course, you have like radio communications that connect the 2 component parts. If you connect it, then there's vulnerability. And we see a lot when we look at like train designs, we actually see under the bonnet the way things are connected. They're perhaps more connected than you might appreciate. And we do a lot of the engineering input and design advice when people come to us with designs and say, can you fit a gateway? Can you embed your software on one of our existing systems? And that's when you get down to the nuts and bolts. And it is very interesting to see, if slightly concerning sometimes, the degree of interconnectivity between the systems. So, highly complex, lifting the lid under the bonnet, many systems all connected together. Obviously, you need to do asset management. You need to understand what is it you've got, what the operating system versions are, what the data flowing is, you need to monitor it. Now, the way that you actually understand is not by going back to the train and dismantling it and unplugging everything. You do it by analyzing the digital flow. And this is one of the things that we do. We have a software that monitors the digital flow, establishes a baseline, does asset discovery, and then looks for anomalies. And the anomalies indicate that something's not quite working right. And when something's not quite working right, you have the potential for disruption of the data, whether CIA or malicious actors. Indication where something's not operating as you expected is an indication of something where you need to investigate further. And so this asset discovery part, you do via the network traffic analysis, that's what it's called. You also work out what the physical network is, but you also need to think about the logical element of it, because the network is not just data and cables and boxes, it also has a structure. What decides whether data goes via this route or that route? What is the driver that decides whether it's going to be sort of modified or programmed or changed or stored? And this is the logical network aspect. If you like, it's the underpinnings or rules of the road for the network, how it passes the information around. And then you need to map what's connected to what. So at this point, it's asset monitoring at a digital level is slightly more complex than at a physical level. Now, when you talk about technical requirements, you talk about engineering. Now, anybody that's worked in systems engineering or any aspect is thinking, great, here it is, it's the V cycle, which is unsurprising because it takes the form of a V. And it's the stepwise 1 through to 12 of how you decide what it is you want your system to do, how you set the requirements, how you then design it, and then how you test whether you've picked the requirements and then whether you've built it right. Now, the reason why I'm showing it here in a conversation about cybersecurity in context with the regulatory and the commercial framework is that often people think about this as a standalone engineering activity. You do your risk assessment, you do your design, and off you go all the way through. But both regulatory and commercial aspects come in at points where you might not expect them here. When it comes to actually design and implementation, you're taking those requirements and you're putting them out into the procurement chain. When you're actually presenting your system and you're accepting it, you're then taking that acceptance and putting it in front of the regulator. The key message to take away is that when you are in non-technical roles, don't wait until it's come right out here in the final design and say, right, that's it, okay, now we're going to take the specification, now we're going to procure it, now we're going to design, build, and test. Go back and have a look to see whether the original principles will actually allow you to manage the cybersecurity risk. Because if you don't have the requirements embedded in the initial design for that kind of monitoring, or you've got the different structure or network connection, by the time you get to the point of manufacturing and integrating, it's a little too late. We often find ourselves coming in at the retrofit stage where you've got an established rolling stock and you need to up-rev it with new Wi-Fi network. And so we're coming in often in the operational side. And even when we're doing new builds and putting our equipment, software and hardware in, often we find ourselves coming in a bit later in the V cycle. As a general rule, go back and see if you can come back to the source reason why something looks the way it does, but also ask, why is it being built this way? And just as there is with safety, it's the same with cybersecurity. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as a simple question. Always ask why, always probe. You never know, you might find something really key and useful. So what are we learning from our seat in our sort of practical deployments? Here are 3 of our current deployments, and it's worthwhile running through just to give you an idea of what it looks like in practice. So with West Midland Trains, we have our software product, and it's on something called an iCamera router. Feel free to Google that. And you might be thinking to yourself, crikey, a hardware box, what does that mean? Hopefully, having shown you the network diagram and the overall way in which a train's connected, you can see that this is just part of a system, provides the Wi-Fi and media. And we work with manufacturers, and it's live and it's operational right now. We also have Northern Trains. And same again, our software looking for that baseline performance of the data and looking for anomalies is live. And again, it's on Wi-Fi and operational local area networks, V for virtual, and it's up and running. We're also operating in the US, and here you are, we've got like another hardware box plugged in with Nomad Digital, and we're on the system, and we are monitoring that data flow, and that is working as a router for Wi-Fi and PIS. Up and running, and that data flow is coming through. Also, what you want to do, and the reason why I put this hard technical slide in as a sort of step change, is to almost desensitize people to the idea that cybersecurity is complex. This is simply a box. It's one of those gateways. You can see all the connections. Those are the Ethernet connection cables, and you can put it in and add it and monitoring it. And the idea for doing that is you get more granular look at the data flow because you've got a separate box, got more capacity to put monitoring software in, but also, and this is key, do you remember when I talked about the PIS and I said, somebody could just come and plug in and get access or modify? If you say to your technician staff, no, you can't just unplug the CCTV cable, unplug the monitoring laptop in where and then, here and now. If you just say you can only plug in to that train network by plugging into this access port, then you can actually have that identity check when someone logs in. So this is one other reason for putting a block in. So when you're looking at that train design and you're thinking to yourself, is this a sensible design? Ask yourself, how do people get access points in? And then carrying on with using real tech deck slides from real technical presentations and putting them straight out to everyone. Here's 2 other things that we're doing, and these are new builds. And it's full of technical detail and level 4 firewall, but hopefully I'm building you confidence. You can just have a Google and see what that is, and also the management of train data. The key thing is that when they were looking at the design, they thought to themselves, we need to separate our TCMS and operational networks, and I showed you an example of that in an earlier slide, and you can see why the rationale, very simple, for separating that out. And also you need to send the data, so sort of trackside, and you need to look at that anomaly detection. There's so much data generated, you cannot send it all out and then analyze it in slow time. You need to be able to pick out the anomalies here and now. And that is a common problem with all cybersecurity installations, whether it's IT, railways, aviation, it's finding the needle in the haystack. And then we've got another example, TCMS, that's the train control gateway. I ran through that again. And then have to found some weaknesses as a function of the risk assessment, which is the thing that happens in the early stage of the V cycle, and they decided we want to have specific networks to identify when we're going to get intrusion, that intrusion detection. When is someone going in and modifying our data? And so you put the software product onto an existing MCG, mobile communication gateway. So that's as technical and detailed as I'm going to get, but that's what real frontline cybersecurity looks like. So hopefully you're feeling, yep, I can actually ask questions about equipment supply and practical installations. So to the commercial and regulatory landscape. Many of you will be aware of the Office of the ORR, the Office of Rail and Road, the regulator, perhaps everybody on this call. Many of you may also be aware of the RM3, which is the Risk Management Maturity Model. And this is the implementation for rail of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. This is the baseline for all the regulation of UK rail, and a version of this is across the board in Europe and more broadly. Health and safety legislation forms the backbone of industry regulation and rail specific. If you ever want to know where to start with cybersecurity, start here and ask yourself, which elements of my digital infrastructure are going to fall under the umbrella of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle? The reality is pretty much everything, and so it needs to be integrated. Now, in addition to that backbone of legislation, you also have regulations and standards. And this slide here is just a snapshot of where we are at right now. And the key message to take away is that things are changing. We already have established standards that are generic, 62443, and we also have the European Union NIS directive, which is across the board and applies to critical national infrastructure. We have US regulations, and the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre has provided a super useful website where it's all consolidated. Thing is that, like, the message to take from this is that people are moving away from generic statements. They're moving to more practical, specific, and detailed implementation expectations. And they're not stopping here. There's further iterations coming out. There is a new version of the EU NIS directive coming out. I think there's early warnings and briefings coming out now. And like I mentioned, the TS 50701, which is a rail-specific cybersecurity technical specification, was out earlier this month. And that's being mentioned, already acknowledged in the Q&A on the TSIs, for those that work with TSIs. So it's moving quite quickly, not only at a technical level through all of that monitoring, but in a regulatory and standards level specific to cybersecurity. And if this hasn't impacted your business operations already, it wouldn't surprise me if it does in the next year or two. At some point in the supply chain, at some point, requirements will come through. So let's try and sort of step back and bring together that geekery detail of the engineering with the standards. So here are sort of 5 key areas where we specifically work, and companies do what clients need. So these are 5 areas of priority. So risk analysis, unsurprisingly, underpins the V cycle, and the risk analysis is also what people do when they do changes to their systems. And CSMRA, which is the European-wide Common Safety Methods, there's TS 50701. And there's a particular challenge when it comes to blending security and safety together. And you may wish to pull the IET Code of Practice down. It's cross-sector, it's very useful. Looking below, we have fleet monitoring, asset management, and incident response. I've highlighted that previously. Again, you have the common safety methods, M for monitoring, the EU NIS, and also there is a requirement in the UK via NIR Online to report issues with the potential to impact safe operations that need to be alerted across the network. Network protection and segregation sounds techie, but I've given an outline here. It simply means don't connect things together directly if you don't need to, and separate out the different parts of the network. EN 61375 is the standard, and there's TS 50701 again. Now, intrusion detection is looking at that baseline of data flow and then identifying any changes. Now, we happen to do it using machine learning, which is a way of triaging out all of that complexity. And there are other ways of doing it as well. In a longer technical talk on cybersecurity, people would talk about other methods as well. But again, monitoring is key. Again, technical specifications. Last but not least, if you have something that's handling communications and handling that data, you want to consider enhanced protection for it because it represents a nub, a nexus, a hub of where that information flow is. And naturally, if people want to come and impact that or modify it, that's where they're going to go. So you need to protect it at an enhanced level. So looking at the context, we've got the technical details, we've got the blending with the regulatory aspect, and if people hear from a commercial or financial background, they're probably thinking, well, what's the bridge to what I do? And I think the key thing here is when you're talking at cybersecurity risk management, it's not that different from any other kind of business risk. You need to identify it, analyze it, mitigate it, and monitor it. And in cybersecurity terminology, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And you can actually line that up side by side with the Plan, Do, Check, Act outline from safety that I showed. The principles under the terminology are the same. Now, one of the things that cybersecurity frameworks do is they are very keen on the process aspect of it, because if you don't follow a clear and structured process, it's easy to miss stuff. And also there is that continuous monitoring and assessment, because one thing that's particularly challenging around cybersecurity is that Tuesday is not the same as Monday. With safety, I'm coming from a sort of safety background, often like Tuesday is the same as Monday, and you can take a longer time base to look for trends and monitoring and analysis. But the internal data flow is so varied and complex, and the external threats change on a daily basis, that this cornerstone of continuous monitoring assessment is something specific and focused to cybersecurity. But stepping back, it is a risk like any other to be managed. And down to the asset management point. It's not cheap to buy a train, and it's not cheap to operate one. And unsurprisingly, you want to be able to operate it reliably and consistently and get the revenue either from freight or passengers. And so when you start to look at the cybersecurity context, that is important in terms of lease values and also getting the most from your rolling stock to ensure that it's available for service. I mean, if you buy it and then you lease it, when you get it back, you want to get it back in a condition that, one, you understand, and two, is not impacted negatively by cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So whilst you have a long lease of operation, you need to be careful around the change management process. You need to make sure that all the people working with you in the supply chain are identifying those requirements and following them through that V cycle and managing them so nothing gets dropped. You need to make sure that the design that you're putting at the early stage in order to maximize the long-term returns is future-proof, i.e. you'll be able to upgrade the software or plug in some of those new boxes. And last but not least, obsolescence. Last thing you want to do is have an IT system which can't be upgraded. So asset management, which is at its heart, engineering and finance together, in order to make sure that you get the most value from your investment and the most consistent operation, definitely start to think about the cybersecurity vulnerabilities throughout the life cycle. Insurance. Now, I wasn't familiar with something called silent cyber, but what you're finding is that insurers, unsurprisingly, didn't consider cybersecurity because they weren't getting many claims about it. But now there is a lot of disruption, a lot of claims are being made on cybersecurity policy. And we're hearing from people that policies are being written that explicitly include or exclude cyber events. And when you buy an insurance for any aspect, they want to know. I understand that, early career drivers have additional monitoring in place, and the same thing is to do with cybersecurity and insurance premiums. They're not going to hand over the money and pay out without consideration. They want to know that the measures you say you've got to have in place are in place. And when it comes to insurance, it's much broader than just the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO's responsibility. This is a full board level, and it's a CFO and board level decision, because if your insurance, you can't claim on it and pay out, you're going to find a real challenge with those expensive assets. Taking one step further, even a corporate governance. If you're a non-exec director of a publicly listed company, which I am not, but I've been a non-exec director, you are governed by the UK Corporate Governance Code. And even smaller organisations, which are not directly regulated by the FRC, also follow general good practice principles. And when you look at the corporate governance code and you search for risk management, there are a few key phrases which really pop out. Risk management is not just about the finances. It's also about whether you understand all the risks that can impact your business, and then you've got controls in place. Cybersecurity falls squarely within this remit. And when I talk to non-execs, they say to me, we're not familiar with the details of cybersecurity. We don't understand it. We can't shape this risk. And so you've got this thing in the corner that people know the label, but they don't understand the details. And so for this talk, cybersecurity in context, I'd encourage people to start to look and ask a very simple question. Do we have a risk management system that considers cybersecurity broadly? Are we monitoring, our compliance controls? Is the regulator going to come find what we're doing and say, actually, your cybersecurity management under NIS is not meeting the grade? So you're stepping right back up to the top level of corporate governance here at board level. And so coming to the wrap-up point and a panel discussion, I only have 3 or 4 slides left to go, and I'm very much looking forward to taking part and passing all the difficult questions to my fellow panelists. But before we do that, 3 or 4 points. Hopefully I've made the case for you now by showing some of the specific examples and projects that actually rolling stock is a digital, and there are upgrades ongoing with digital systems, and there are brand new rolling stock that are coming out digital from the factory gate. More and more systems have got a digital element with it. And there are 2 views around cybersecurity. You've got I guess the doom and gloom story here, really, that if you don't invest in it, bad things will happen, and people are going to get very upset, your systems are not going to work. But I'd like to sort of leave with a positive comment that if you don't invest in it, you can't then access that higher performance of your digital rolling stock and move towards that 100% availability, because you are not able to have maximum reliability through strong monitoring and understanding of what your systems are. And I leave here with just like a little snippet of technical detail, because one of the things with cybersecurity is there's no getting away from the fact that you've got to get right down to the geeky detail in order to understand what's happening and in order to be able to manage and understand the risks and put in place measures. Often people look at sort of safety management systems and say, yep, I've got policies, procedures, and awareness in place, we've got it sorted. But I say for cybersecurity, this is called the defense in depth model. You really need to be able to move from that to physical barriers, to perimeter, right down to the techie detail of what the network is, what the software host is, what the application is meshing with that host, and the actual data itself. But there are standards that can provide you guidance of how this all fits together. So last but not least, things are changing. Railways are specific, they're different. It's always useful to talk to people who've done it beforehand, whether it's us or anybody else. Cybersecurity is a practical discipline, and integration operational experience is key. And whatever you do, it shouldn't be burdensome to the way the network runs. You need to not be able to disrupt the data flows. You need to fit in with existing network design and just look for the things that you need to be worried about, or behavioral anomaly detection, as we call it. And so there we are, some cyber truths. It's a process. If you don't know about it, you can't secure it. And you may believe you're secure today, but what about tomorrow? Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm sure everyone will agree. We have had 3 questions come through. If anyone else has questions, please make sure you start typing them in for us. First of all, we have one from Nathaniel Owen. He asks, how do you see the role of technology and cybersecurity changing as fleets continue to modernize? Do you think systems are vulnerable in the same way? Do you think railway systems are vulnerable in the same way as other online systems?
Do you want to answer that first?
I'll let you draw straws between you for this.
I'm going to pass it to you, Claire.
Thank you very much.
I've been talking for half an hour.
Yeah, no, Nathaniel, that's a really good question, to be honest. I believe that there's a few questions in there. How do I see the role changing? I think that when it comes to information security, we're constantly on the move. Our biggest problem is trying to literally lasso our colleagues, whether that's in OT or in IT. So whether they're technologies in the corporate IT world or yourselves in engineering, we have to lasso you so that we can hold on to your shirt tails, because you're moving at such pace. We have to keep up with you. But there's some really basic principles, and that's what we look at all the time. The big thing is getting engaged, and we probably need more of us more than anything else. But we also, I feel that the way that it should change is recognizing this isn't just security's job, this is everyone's job, I suppose. And whilst that's always sort of another one of those common phrases that come out, that security is everyone's business, we recognize that they're specialists, but at the same time I think that, you know, security should be embedded with absolutely all technologies sort of DNA, that you're always thinking about some of the principal items, which Emma quite nicely pulled out in her presentation, about asset risk management, about patch and vulnerability management, about access control, segregation. There's some really basic principles there that need to be baked into your designs, and the continual improvement, which is absolutely key. It doesn't stop with as soon as something goes live. It's got to be continual improvement of plan, do, check, act. That was one of the questions.
Can't remember the rest one. Do you want to run through them again?
The other one was, do you think railway systems are vulnerable in the same way as other online systems?
Most definitely. No doubt. And in fact, what makes them slightly more vulnerable is the fact that the access control to them, and that we are a little bit late coming to the party of security. And that's why I feel that there are quite a lot of potentially sophisticated threat actors that could be quite interested in what you're doing.
Okay. On that basis, just a quick one from myself. Do you think that we perhaps underestimate physical access? The railway is quite obvious. There's quite a lot of places where you still got the standard budget lock, which most anyone can have access to. A lot of cupboards with equipment in. Do you think that that presents a big risk to us?
For me, I wouldn't say it's just another risk. I think that the bigger risk is the threat actors that you can't see, that haven't got physical access, but the cyber world brings them into sort of like the threat environment. The threat environment is brought into our environment. Physical is always going to be there, but you know, it's something which I think invariably we've had covered for quite some time. I might be wrong, but certainly for us, you know, that is sometimes getting our engineering fellows over the sort of thought process that it isn't just about the physical side, that the cyber introduces something different and you're not going to necessarily see it.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question from Fiona Malcolm. What's the plan for applicability of the new updated European standards which were mentioned in light of Brexit? Will they still become mandatory in UK law?
I'm going to have to answer that one. I used to work for the Rail Safety and Standards Board. So I think that the CSMs, as far as I understand it, and I'm not speaking officially here because I no longer work for the RSSB, the CSMs remain in place. And so things such as the TSIs, Technical Standards for Interoperability, also apply, if nothing else, because when you're procuring and implementing systems coming from other countries, you need to make sure that they're interoperable, and the regulations there obviously are relevant for European operation, but they're also relevant for the UK because we've come up to this point with the interoperability regs. I think that what's happening with NIS and alignment is a question for the DFT, but leaving aside the legislation and the Brexit question, the content, the reason, the rationale why this legislation is being generated, which is to make our critical national infrastructure safer, that I don't think anybody can argue with that. We need to consider this. We need to consider the resilience. We need to make sure things work as the way people expect them and when they expect them to be available. And so should there be any form of divergence in the future, I would hope that the core principles are maintained.
Thank you very much. I think Claire's already touched a little bit on this, but it's another question. A lot of people are not aware of the technology side of the railway. What can people on the ground do to make sure our railways are safe?
I'm going to pass that one to Richard.
That's actually a really interesting question. Obviously, being in the rail sector, we have inherited a lot of things from, from the 70s, 80s, and so on. I mean, there's an interesting story that we have here in Birmingham is sort of looking at, say, New Street, which is still 80s old equipment, and that's the key thing we need to do is we need to benchmark of what we had then and what we've inherited, not only just with the brand new systems that are coming in. Obviously, in the railway, we also have many very different roles, whether you're a member of the Orange Army, you're someone involved in design and maintenance, and actually working on what the next step of evolution, so sort of hinting sort of what Claire, you were saying about continuous improvement. The key thing is we need to know what our assets are. Now, NIS has sort of given us a bit of a kick to say, you really should know what your assets are. So what is actually part of your critical essential service? What is actually making up all these systems? What are those technical dependencies? And just like that slide demo you showed, sort of what a rolling stock architecture could look like, we need to think about, say, what is actually making up this particular part of the signaling system, and then building out, because we should never have the case where you go into a building or something, and I point at a box and ask, what does that do? And everyone just turns around and says, I don't know.
Yeah, you want to avoid that. You want to avoid that, and like it's more common than you might realise.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you very much, Richard. Next question from Benjamin Smith: how are false positives dealt with within the operational context when dealing with anomalous behaviour? What about false negatives? Are they dealt with in a process of model improvement?
Claire. The thing is, like, Claire uses our software system, and so I'm sitting there thinking, how do we do this?
With any false positives, you've got to determine and identify whether they are, first of all, because if you have got a false positive, then obviously you've got to sort of confirm or deny, and then manage them accordingly. And if they do come out as a false positive, then you've got to calibrate that system so that it hopefully doesn't give you more of the same, I suppose. That's one of the big things. But therein is one of the issues, that recognizing about, we've sort of touched on it in the latter parts of Emma's brief, which is about people, process, technology. We cannot just sit and think technology is the answer to everything and invest loads and loads of money in that if you haven't got anyone to respond to that technology, and that is around what is the process to deal with it when there's a trigger, an alarm is triggered. And also, do you have the people? So one of the things that we have, which is it is on our IT, but we can obviously use that across also our OT when we get more and more things like RazorSecure, but it's like a security operations center, and if you've got it's got lots of technologies there, but the thing is if you don't have the people sat behind it, they can't do anything. They've just got loads of tickets, loads of alarms going off, and in fact it just creates a huge amount of problems for you because you're unable to actually confirm or deny.
It's absolutely right. I think that the triage, I mean, some of the questions I'm getting asked more and more is like, if you introduce your product into the network, are you not introducing a vulnerability? We can handle that bit. But then how do you know when you've got a problem? And this is where I think one of the easy ways to describe it, I talked about this flow of data and the baseline. One of the ways it was described to me, and which I think is quite useful, if you go and have your blood pressure taken on a daily basis, that sets a baseline for what your GP should expect. And then if you start to get variations from that point, that's when you start to pay attention. The thing is that, like, you can do that for a train. You can look for the variations, and through this asset discovery aspect, you can actually tell when someone is plugging in or not plugging in, or someone's adding something to the network, because you can see the changes in the data flow. Now, if it's happening at 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon and that you know your train's in the maintenance depot and like there's like technician X expecting there 3:30 in the afternoon, then you can then discount it. But Claire's absolutely right that you need the human in the loop there. If it's happening at 3:30 in the morning, that's something else to be concerned about. So the time aspect and the type of activity is important. It's not just any data changes at any point. When you start to get recurring patterns that you're not expecting, like unauthorized access via Wi-Fi or attempted access, then you know that someone's trying to break in. I think one of the real difficulties is that unlike a physical fault where you look at it, you scan it and you've got a crack, digital faults in all its broadest sense, whether it's self-generated from software or poor upgrades or from external intrusions, are a lot harder to identify. So this cautious watchfulness that you need in a security operations center and this human in the loop and the curiousness to ask what if, that's essential. You cannot rely on a machine to kind of triage and sort and then automatically fix it. For something that's so technological, it requires a certain surprising amount of human engagement in order to make it effective.
Okay, I've got two more questions that probably touching themes that have been addressed there, but another one from Nathaniel Owen for you. Do you think as part of the awareness, basic cybersecurity training should be mandatory? And how would you suggest we engage our people in this to stop it appearing like a tick box exercise?
I would like to answer that. I would have a go at that one, because one of the things, if I can take you to how we implemented GDPR, whilst that's the boring office type stuff, you know, that is, we engaged through our businesses through champions, and that's what we're trying to set up throughout Ariva as well with our engineering colleagues, so that each of our engineering teams will have a champion that we can help to engage and be our eyes and ears in that team. But I completely concur with the requirement to actually have proper training as well, and in terms of skills training, and that would be great. That would be the ideal answer.
Richard, I reckon you should answer. You were nodding your head.
Yeah, so absolutely. So, I mean, unfortunately, shoving everyone in the classroom back in the good old days, you could do that checkbox exercise. It's changed, especially with what the landscape's looking like. You know, we're seeing new kinds of vulnerabilities and exploitations. You know, yes, most of the time it's the same old ransomware, but it's manifesting itself in different ways. And my argument is you need to engage people rather than just talk at them. So what I actually have done is a few companies have now started doing it, and I've sort of nicked their approach, is you actually just have a conversation with people. So whether they're in finance, HR, they're someone in a depot, you go, tell me a bit about your role. Right, and let's just think about what the security implications or what cybersecurity actually means to your job. So in finance, we're caring about preventing fraud and loss of funds. HR, personal information data and sort of things around there. So helping people understand what really the assets are and what they need to do and think about to try and protect those assets. And whilst you do it every year, things change and people go, and I've started seeing the maturity of people now saying, oh, I've started doing this, is this the kind of right of approach? And I'm thinking, you've been having a look at this yourself, which is really good. You're sort of, I think actually you're turning people into new champions, or actually making them think about things just subconsciously. It's part of their everyday job.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, one of the reasons for RazorSecure doing these webinars and looking for sort of platforms where we can engage and have discussions and get people thinking is that I remember turning up in my first sort of few weeks and coming into meetings, and I was coming back and talking to my boss, and I was like, we're saying the same thing. You know, we're having the same conversations, and we're in rooms, well, obviously like Teams rooms, you know, with maybe 15 people, and we can tell by the questions that are asked, there's this enormous divergence and range of understanding and engagement and leaning on the topic. And everything that we can do and that everybody else in the industry with an interest in cybersecurity can do can get to bring people up to the level and get everybody feeling that they can say, oh, what about this? If we can get the collective working together, then the rail will become more safe. But definitely it has to be away from the tick box exercise that you just go there, tick, and then stop thinking cybersecurity is a continuing thinking, curiosity type of discipline.
Thank you very much. And final question, unless anyone manages to sneak one in quickly. This is from Alex Laws. The cyber industry changes very fast. The rail industry historically changes quite slowly, approvals, etc. How can people make sure that security updates, patches, etc. can happen fast enough to make them actually useful?
I think that, again, just from our side, monitoring is key, because monitoring will tell you what you've got there and then. And so even if you've got systems that are like, were updated a year ago or 2 years ago, as long as you actually know what the version number, then you know what you've got, then you can make a judgment call as to whether that software version is dangerously out of date in terms of vulnerability or can be left as is. The railway may move slowly, but the need for monitoring is there as a background, because if you don't know what you've got, you don't know how much of a problem you may be walking into. The other thing is that whilst like railway moves slowly, railway is continuously looking to improve. You have change, updates, you've got like retrofits and things like that. And so those are happening. And those, as long as you put a cyber change control process in, like you do for any safety related changes or any changes, you have to look at them to make sure they're not going to negatively impact the safe running of the railway. As long as you look at all the incremental changes, you can actually stay not ahead of the curve, but keeping pace. But I know what you mean. Cyber moves very quickly, and the railway is more of an iterative development industry.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that question? No,
Okay. I think I would concur with what Emma has said, really, but it is a matter of process and people. That actually we've got to get into what we call a drumbeat or a battle rhythm, whereby this is second nature. Because if you think cybersecurity is fast, the worst thing is the threats are even faster, and you've got to stay one step ahead of them. That's all we care about in some ways, but to do that, you need to make it a routine heartbeat.
Okay, thank you very much. No one else has managed to sneak in a question, and we've just snuck in under the hour. So I would like to thank all three of you, Claire, Richard and Emma, for taking the time out to give this talk to us this evening. It's been very informative, and I'm sure that there will be plenty of people going away with their eyes opened a bit more about cybersecurity in the railway industry. So thank you very much. Yes, we shall bring the webinar to an end now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some great questions as well.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions.
Yes, thank you everyone for your questions.